Hey guys, hope you're well. Got one final lesson here for you before the end of the unit. I'll tell you, I've had a couple different thoughts about how I wanted to get this one to you. Thought about, um, you know, putting this together, some sort of activity. Really, I'd like to um, kind of redo this whole thing from the ground up, but just time's a factor and haven't been able to do that. So these notes, I am going to try and go very fast and just kind of give you an overview of each slide. There's quite a bit of information on them. So if at any point, obviously, if I'm moving too fast, that's why you got the pause button. Hit it. You can fill in the rest of the outline because I really might skim over some parts pretty quickly, and then you can move on. Okay. So the whole point of this set of notes here is to look at what makes us special, to try to figure that out a little bit. And we're different. No democracy has ever come close to thriving the way that we have. We talked about last time that successful democracies, are actually the exception to the rule. And a lot of countries have died over a lot less than some of the things that we have been through in our history. So we're going to try and just look at that, look at some of those different occasions, and try to take from that what it is that sets us apart. This is the slide that we finished with last time, so again, I'm not going to spend very much time on this. You see there where we're at right now, and just the idea of fear versus hope. That's going to be kind of the big driver for the stuff we're getting ready to look at. And then you see there our duty as citizens to value what we have and to pay attention, understand the importance of the truth, and to participate. Okay. So we are living in extremely unique times. Probably have to go back at least 50 years in our country's history to get to a time where we were this divided in the 1960s. But more and more, it's becoming apparent that you probably have to go back 150 years. You probably have to go back to the Civil War to get to a time where Americans were living in such completely different worlds, because that's kind of where we're at right now. That American citizens see other American citizens as a bigger threat to America than another world power like China or Russia. If you ask a lot of folks, if someone comes from a different political party, then they're the enemy. There's statistics out there that say that many parents don't want their kids marrying people who are members of the other political party and things like that. Just crazy stuff that we've never seen before in our history. And so, really, what we have to try to cling to is hope. Like I said, we're going to look at that on the next slide, and trying to play on our best instincts instead of our worst, because it's something that we've faced before many times, where we've been tested from within. And people have been asking for a long time. I think I mentioned this in the last presentation. People have been asking for a long time, what's going to be that thing that brings down America? Because every great empire that's ever existed hasn't lasted. So what's going to be the thing that takes us down? And people have been wondering, would it be Russia? Would it be China? Would it be some other world power that comes onto the scene? But the most likely thing is that we take ourselves down if we become so divided that we can't function anymore. Okay, or we weaken ourselves so much that someone else comes in and takes advantage of that. One of the big themes, though, from this that you're going to see is that America hasn't just went on a straight line upward in terms of becoming a more perfect union. We've zigzagged up and down. We've had some huge challenges, and we've had enormous struggles, but we've always come out on the other side, and we're usually stronger because of those struggles. Okay, we keep moving forward. We keep trying to progress towards that more perfect union. So here's that slide I've mentioned a couple times about hope and fear. This might be the most important slide in this whole slideshow. Fear and hope both have important functions. They both serve a purpose. Fear is there to guard us against things that we should be afraid of. It's an alarm system, a warning system for us. The thing is, though, that we can't allow fear to dominate everything that we do. We can't allow it to. I mean, fear is there to help us, but we can't let it dominate our thinking. When we do, we make bad decisions. If we make decisions out of fear, that leads us down a path we don't want to go down. In America, you can look back at our history. Typically speaking, as a country, our worst decisions have been made out of fear. Some of the worst things that we've done have been because we were scared. But on the flip side of that, most of our best decisions have been made out of hope. Okay, when we've tried to see the good in each other and seeing the good possibilities that lie ahead, when we're striving for those things, that's when we've done our best work. And the thing about that is, when we're trying to look for the best, we're usually looking for the best in each other, and we're usually working together. Again, the greatest accomplishments in American history came as a result of us coming together, not being at each other's throats. So Abraham Lincoln is one of our most hopeful, and it's not a coincidence, one of our greatest presidents. And it says it here in a second, but our greatest presidents have all tried to play on the hope of Americans instead of the fear. But he said, don't give in to fear and act upon the better angels of our nature. Okay, that's really kind of, again, what he was talking about, is being hopeful and working together and seeing the good in each other and things like that nature, instead of being divided and looking for reasons to hate each other and all that kind of stuff. So our greatest presidents have all really tapped in to the hope of Americans instead of the fear. But we've always had politicians who have tried to play on our fears. We're going to talk about Joe McCarthy here in a little bit, who might be the greatest example of that. And if you've had U.S. history already, you've learned about him. So you see down there at the bottom of the slide, fear divides, hope unites. We've always been better together. It just kind of sums all that up. So one of the things that kind of puts us in this situation where we have these ups and downs is because that's kind of the design of America. And I don't know if you would call it a flawed design. It's a double-edged sword. Okay. We are a government of the people and by the people, but people aren't perfect. And so that people have their ups and downs, and so does America. So we've always been about debate and discussion and making changes and trying to move forward. And we have those guiding principles of happiness, freedom, and equality, but we also are individuals. And not everybody wants the same thing all the time. And sometimes when someone does well, that means someone else isn't doing well. So that has all led to us being a country that's adapted over time and tried to strive in the right direction. But that process is very, very slow sometimes. And that's extremely frustrating for people because they want to see progress and they want to see more and they want things to be better. But it's hard to continue to wait. And some people feel like they've been waiting for generations or beyond. And so eventually people get kind of fed up with stuff. So we're going to look at several different periods or eras in our history. And this is where I might really go pretty fast. Okay. And this is one where I'm going to give you some information that I'm going to let you, like I said, you're going to fill in the outline here and give you the synopsis, but this is kind of one that we're going to come back to at the very end. Okay. So one of the other themes that you're going to catch here is that a lot of times the dips, the big drops in our history in terms of things that we should be proud of, come right after a big triumphant event. Okay, so the Civil War, the Union wins, slavery, the 13th Amendment, slavery is done away with, and then we have lots of African Americans who actually almost immediately become members of Congress and things of that nature. But then Reconstruction, Abraham Lincoln's assassinated, and Reconstruction just completely turns into a giant mess. Lincoln is maybe our greatest president, and he's followed up by maybe our worst president, Andrew Johnson. and he just kind of hands things back over to leaders of the rebellion against the United States. Okay, and then eventually, after some ups and downs through Reconstruction in the 1870s, um, Rutherford B. Hayes becomes president of the United States, and there's kind of a deal cut to make him president, and then Reconstruction ends, and it's just incomplete, and then that allows the Jim Crow laws and the black codes and things of that nature to come in and become the new law of the South, and it's basically institutionalized racism, and it's a different form of slavery that exists within the South, and it stays there for a long time, and the repercussions of that are still with us today. All right. So another kind of up and then a down is the progressive movement of the early 1900s. Teddy Roosevelt talks about the square deal, fighting for the little guy, doing away with big businesses that, not doing away with them, but regulating them because they just basically were their own governments within the United States of America, and they did whatever they wanted to do, and the almighty dollar ruled everything. The working man had no rights, consumers had no rights, and these big businesses could literally just do whatever they wanted at the expense of everyone else. So Roosevelt and other progressives came in and really, fought a war against all that stuff, and tried to create more equality within the United States of America. And we saw some great things happen as a result of that. Okay. Like I said, just rights that didn't exist before. This is where we see them come from. The right to for workers to unionize, to a limited number of hours in a work week, a minimum amount of pay, women getting the right to vote, and so on. Lots and lots of stuff like that came out of this era, but it wasn't for everyone. And namely, African Americans did not see any kind of advancement in their fortunes whatsoever as a result of all this stuff. So it's, there were some shortcomings. But just like, and I have to go back to that previous event we just looked at with Reconstruction, typically speaking, when people who did not have rights before, or who had very limited rights, when they gain a step towards equality and they gain new rights, that means that someone else is losing something. Someone else is losing power, and it might even be just the perception of having power over someone else or being above someone else. So while many Southerners did not actually own slaves, again, stretching back to the previous event that we were just looking at, there was a lot of people who did own slaves, and they lost fortunes when slavery was done away with. Most Southerners were too poor to own slaves, but they still lost something, and that was a feeling of superiority. Even though a lot of them were just extremely low on the scale as far as society was concerned, they always could say, well, at least I'm not them. And now African Americans were released from slavery and could get jobs, and they were now competing against those Southern white folks for their positions and everything else. And so that created a lot of animosity, and that's how you get things like the KKK and people buying into stuff like that. All right. So this progressive movement created similar feelings in folks, and that's why we see a resurgence of the KKK. In fact, this is when it becomes more powerful than it ever was before, or it has been since. So it actually gets to the level where we have, massive marches of the Ku Klux Klan, and we have certain pockets within our country where you basically had to be a member of the KKK if you wanted to get elected. The governor of Indiana was a member of the KKK, and most of Indiana actually, like I said, you had to be a member, or you weren't going to get elected. It became mainstream. 11 governors, 16 senators, and 75 members of the House of Representatives were openly members of the Ku Klux Klan. That sounds crazy today, but that's, in the teens of the 1900s, that's the way it was. But eventually, truth prevails, and America kind of sees through the Klan for what it was, and it was pretty much done away with by the end of the 1920s. Okay, so the fourth event, McCarthyism. Talked about mentioned Joe McCarthy earlier. Um, check my time here, maybe. So Joe McCarthy was a guy that figured out how to play on the fear of Americans. The world was a scary place in the late 40s and early 50s. World War II had ended and America had won, but now we had two superpowers with nuclear arsenals, both basically threatening to annihilate each other at the drop of a hat. Okay, China fell to communism, along with you already had the Soviet Union, and so it seemed like the whole world, America, was being surrounded by communism, and Americans were terrified of it and terrified of not just of nuclear war, but what communism was and what it stood for. And so a senator who was basically about to fall off the face of the earth and not win re-election realizes, if I scare people enough, I can get people to vote for me because they'll think I'm an insider, a guy who's going to be able to hunt these people down and do away with all this stuff. And so he literally started a political witch hunt. Okay, where you're innocent or you're guilty until proven innocent, and there's no way to prove your innocence. And he knew how to use the media for his purposes, and the guy becomes extremely powerful until a few years later. Again, it's a long couple of years, but a few years later, Americans kind of started to realize that this was all a bunch of baloney, and that he really wasn't. He had nothing to back up anything that he was claiming. He just knew how to play on people's fear, and so it's another case here of Americans got swept up in this stuff. They got swept up in their fear. They bought into it. They loved sitting and watching the spectacle of it. They thought that, they bought into all the garbage that this guy was selling them, until eventually they realized that that's what it was. It was garbage. And so they moved on. So we have a tendency to get caught up in things, but eventually kind of see them for what they are and figure them out and learn from those lessons and move on. So then this is kind of the last major one that we're going to look at. Like I said, went through them pretty quick here, but JFK is assassinated in 1963, it's 10 years into the civil rights movement. If you've already had U.S. history with me, you know the Kennedy assassination is kind of a passion of mine. I inherited that from my dad. This is one of the things we don't get into so much because we just don't have time, and that is the impact that Kennedy's assassination had on African Americans, because they finally believe that JFK, after 100 years after the Civil War, they're still being denied the right to vote in many places. Segregation is still a thing, so they can't eat in places where whites can eat. They can't sit on certain places of the bus. They can't. Some places they can't go to school together and things like that. They feel like JFK is finally the one who he endorsed Martin Luther King, or he got Martin Luther King's endorsement. He endorsed that whole movement, and that when he got into office, he was going to be their president. And then he's assassinated, and a lot of African Americans believe that when he died, that his agenda was going to die with him, and that their hopes were gone. So, partially because of Kennedy's assassination, because Americans got swept up in this grief, but they wanted to see his legacy carry on, and they wanted to, finish what he started. 1964, the Civil Rights Act was passed, and it was an extremely sweeping, powerful law that basically did away with all the garbage that had existed that wasn't dealt with during Reconstruction. Now, it did not solve racism, and obviously, like I said, we've seen enough in the last couple months to know that we're not rid of that yet. However, it did away with a lot of the institutionalized laws that were reinforcing discrimination and racism. So so that people could not be denied things because of their race, their sex, their religion, or their nationality. And then you had the Voting Rights Act of 1965 shortly following that. So it took us from the end of the Civil War, 1965, that is 100 years after the end of the Civil War. And it shows, again, how painfully slow from the beginning of this thing to the end America can move, but it's always moving. It's always moving in that direction. And it may not feel that way sometimes, but again, we have there's something about our nation that has always kept us moving forward and fighting through and learning and getting better. So this slide kind of sums that up. In some ways, what we just looked at, we're talking about some of the low points in our history and some of the things that, Americans have done for awful causes. And we didn't even touch on like what happened to Native Americans, for instance, the Japanese internment camps of World War II, which were literally not death camp. They weren't death camps, but they were concentration camps for anyone who might look like they're Japanese. That's racism right there. That was carried out by the United States of America. But so even though our report card may not be the best, we didn't discuss what the grade card of other nations look like, and every country has got its demons. And so even though it's taken us longer to get to where we want to go, we have been through and survived things that would have and have destroyed just about every other nation in history. So the question is, now that we're here, this is in your court. This has fallen into your lap now. It's your job. You are the next crop of citizens, and you're the ones that are going to decide where things go from here. So what do you do? Okay, we going back to the beginning. Number one thing is to embrace hope instead of fear. Don't look at your fellow Americans out of fear. Look at them out of hope, and try to find common ground and try to find ways to work with each other. And today, the playing field for that is online, because that's where we are so much. And it's got to be in person too. Don't misconstrue that. We have to treat each other fairly and treat each other with compassion in person. There's no doubt about that. But we have a tendency to act on our more extreme instincts when we're online, and that's why we keep coming back to that. Okay, so point number 1 out of 5 here: take part in the political process. It's not a perfect process, but the thing is, and people use that as an excuse to not participate, but if those people don't participate, it's not going to get any better, and it's not going to improve any faster if we sit on the sidelines and all we do is gripe about it. You got to join in. Tribalism. I think I mentioned this close to on day 1. We can't be on teams here in America. We have to have one team ultimately. We can have our views and about how society should operate, and we can argue with each other, but it's got to be like a family. Like the United States of America has to be a family, and just like you have arguments within your family and disagreements, but when it comes down to it, if there's a threat from the outside, you're first and foremost, you're a member of that family. That's what the United States should be like. But it's we've gotten away from that. That we view each other as enemies rather than members of the family. Okay, so we got to stay away from this whole tribalism thing where it's, I have my side and you have your side. My guy's always right, no matter what he does or says. He's never wrong, and your side's never right. And not only are you never right, but you have bad intentions. You're evil. Your side doesn't want good for the United States of America. It wants to destroy America. It wants to annihilate everything that it stands for, and therefore nothing good can come from your side. That's tribalism. And if me talking about it sounds ridiculous, it is ridiculous. But that's how we've lived for close to a decade now, and it just continues to get worse. Respect facts and use reason. There have to be facts. There has to be a truth. There can be disagreement about what those facts represent. There can be disagreement about how to move forward and how to interpret things, but there has to be an agreement that there is a truth and we are all operating in the same universe. Okay. Um, and if we can't meet in the middle, at least on that, at least have an understanding that there's a truth and we're all kind of operating within the realm of that truth, um, that, we're dead. America is done, period. And that may sound extreme, but it's the truth. That will be the downfall of America if we cannot come to some understanding that we have a shared truth and we have to work out from there. Okay, all right. So find a critical balance. So I don't know why I inserted that. It was about the only picture I could find that had one of those scales where I was looking for balance. The words that are on those scales mean absolutely nothing to what we're talking about. But it's all about balance. Okay. That you need to try and make sure that you're open to at least hearing different points of view and to have your thinking challenged. And then if you learn new things, to adjust how you view everything and adjust maybe what you think. I'm not telling you to challenge your core beliefs about your faith or your values that were instilled in you by your family or anything like that. But you have to be willing to learn, and you have to be willing to maybe even change what you think sometimes when you learn something new. And um, hopefully you're going to be a better person for that, and you're going to be more likely to hear other people out and to have conversations and discussions with those people and in a healthy way. Because if we're going to move forward, the bottom line is we have to move forward together. If we're pulling against each other as a nation constantly, we're not going to survive. Period. Finally, history. Okay. And I'm biased because I'm a history teacher, but the longer I teach, the more I pay attention to things, the more it becomes apparent to me that history does indeed, if it doesn't repeat itself, I think the famous line is, it doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. You see the same things over and over again. And if you're a student of history, and that does not mean you have to memorize all of it and read history books and watch the History Channel all the time, but be aware of America's past and know and understand that there aren't many things left to happen that we haven't already seen before in some way, shape, or form. And history can tell us how we should behave and how we should move forward. And if we've made mistakes in our past, then we learn from those too. Just like any other, like the Germany, they have horrible mistakes in their past, and they're doing everything they can to learn from those and to move on. And we can't sweep our past under the rug either. Our history with Native Americans, with slavery, that's part of us, and we have to learn from it, and we have to move forward. Looking back at a guy like Joseph McCarthy, we need to learn from what he did and learn from how Americans reacted, and take those lessons and use them, and so that America can continue to progress and move forward. So, to recap, this is the slide we already looked at, but it's important to see it again with all the other things that we've flipped through. We've been here before. All of our greatest tests have come from within, and it's up to us to choose hope. We have to do that, okay? And we've got to keep trying to move forward in hope. So there's the last thing. Hope's going to guide us as long as we choose to let that happen. But the other thing is that we have reason to hope because we're America, and that's not just propaganda. We can look back in our history, and we can know and we can see that America has always fought through tough times, and we've been divided at times, but we've always come back together in the end and move forward together. And that's what we have to do. And now, again, that's on us. We're the ones that have to keep moving that forward, and we don't want to be the ones that see that fall apart. So hopefully this unit has encouraged you to have a better understanding of your role in all this, and that's the direction we're going to be moving in over the next couple months or whatever. Okay, so appreciate you guys taking the time to watch this. Tried to go as fast as I could. Again, a lot of information. Holler at me if you have any questions, and look forward to seeing you soon. Okay.